All right, everyone, welcome. So, what I've been kind of doing this World Series is taking notes of just common situations or things that I come up, common mistakes that I see people making over and over again. And one of the most common ones is with bet sizing. And so, in my opinion, when you are, starting out, beginning of the tournament, one of the quickest, most reliable ways to tell how good someone is at poker is through the bet sizes that they choose. And the way people are altering their bet sizes or using wrong sizes on certain boards or correct sizes on certain boards is often a very a very telling sign of how studied the person is and how they think about the game of poker. And that's kind of like one of my first indications of whether I think a player is very weak or very strong. Um, while playing. And so I thought today, like we've talked about bet size in the past, I think it's one of the things that like a lot of bad regs, what separates a lot of bad regs from good regs is being able to size correctly in certain spots. And one of the things also I've seen this summer is just like the very, very misuse of overbets. People trying to overbet because they're not supposed to overbet in spots, but they're overbetting in spots where you just don't get to overbet. And so that's why today we'll be talking about bet sizing and kind of giving you a framework of how to think while you're in game to help you choose between bet sizes and focusing more on like small sizings or large sizings. You're never going to get bet sizing exactly right. Obviously, in a solver, you can put 30 different bet sizes and it's going to choose whatever one's the correct sizing for different portions of your range. We're human, we're not trying to do that. So often I'll only play like maybe two sizings in a spot, and yeah, trying to figure out what sizings make the most sense, and hopefully today will give you a very good framework for that. The best way to get things out of today's webinar is to answer the questions. I don't care if you're right, I don't care if you're wrong, but you want to have an answer so that if you're wrong, you can start to figure out why you were wrong. And that's how you're going to learn and how you're going to improve. Versus if you don't have an answer, and answer and also kind of think of the why. Why are you saying that answer? What's your reasoning behind it? So kind of the title of today's webinar is bet sizing, the small and big game. So betting frequency and sizing. Often our frequency and sizing of our betting strategy can be answered with two questions: who wins the small game, and who wins the big game. So let's talk about the small game first. The small game is often dictated by who has the most low equity hands in their range. This is often referred to as air or how often they miss. And whoever has less air or misses the flop less often generally wins the small game. And there's different varying degrees, like how much do you win the small game by, all can be parts of the answer. So small game winners are allowed to bet more frequently and for a smaller size to fold out the air of the other player. So when one player has a lot of air in their range, you can bet thinner for value because the range that's going to call you is going to be weaker. So therefore, you can bet much thinner for value, and it doesn't have to be this polarizing bet because the range that continues versus your small bet is going to be very wide and have less equity. So you don't need a strong equity hand to be betting for value or protection. The big game. The big game often is answered by who has the most high equity hands in their range. Uh, Now, notice I'm saying equity hands, high equity hands, and in the small game, I'm saying low equity hands. Um, on different flops, different hands have different types of equity profiles. So I'm not just referring to, you know, sets, over pairs, the nuts necessarily. There's a lot of different hands that can have very high equity on different flops. So we're going to take a look into that. Um, Higher equity hands often can be betting large. However, If you're not winning the big game and your opponent can also have those high equity hands, those large bets tend to go away. So when you get a bet large is when there's a gap between the amount of high equity hands that one player has and the amount of high equity hands that another player has. And it's those differences that allow some large bets to begin to creep in. So winning both games. It is possible to win both the small game and the big game. This can lead to a split strategy where both small bets and big bets are used. So we're going to talk about some examples here. And first, we're going to look at some button versus big blind spots, and we'll look at a couple of different stack depths here. I have these are older sims that I have run on my computer right now to explain what I want to look at. So we're going to start off with a few of these, pretty common flops. We got like a king jack deuce flop, 7-4 deuce type of flop, and a 6 5. I'm not sure if I have these exact flops, but we're going to find specific structures here. Let's ask this question first. Of these three flops, button versus big blind, and let's say we are 100 big blinds effective. Okay? 100 big blinds, so that way we can really get some, which of these flops, one of these flops is going to bet small, one of these flops is going to bet large, and one of these flops is going to bet kind of like, like let's say one's going to bet very large, and one's going to bet like kind of a medium to large, more of the middle of the two. Which of these flops at like 100 big blinds is going to correlate to one of these three bet sizes here? So king jack deuce, 7-4 deuce, jack 6-5 two tone. Which one's betting small? Which one's betting very large, like an overbet or pot size, and which one's kind of betting medium to large? So let's start with first, which of these flops is going to bet small? And I believe it's going to be king jack deuce flop is going to bet small. 7-4 deuce, I think is going to bet very large, probably an overbet. And then jack 6-5 is going to kind of be in the middle. Okay, so a lot of people were saying king jack deuce is very large and 7-4 deuce is very small. So we're going to focus kind of on these two flops and not as much on the jack 6-5 because it's kind of in the middle, and hopefully you can kind of understand why. So let's pull up first. So king jack deuce. Why do you think I'm saying that we bet small on king jack deuce? So I'm going to highlight here the big blinds range right here. And first, let me ask you this. Who wins the small game on king 10 deuce? And why? Who wins the small game on king 10 deuce and why? This is the big blinds range right here. And here's the buttons range right here. So I can show you the answer. We check, and you notice here there's three possible answers: 30%, 65%, and 100%. And as you can see here, you only bet 30%, and you bet 100% of the time for 30%. Okay, it simply has to do with the big blind has a lot more air in the spot than us. So we have every offsuit 10x, we have every offsuit king x. The bottom of our range, even like queen 8, has an overcard to the 10, has backdoor straight draw. Some of them have a spade. Jack 8 has an overcard to the 10. Some of them have a spade, but all of them, even jack of clubs, 8 of diamonds, can turn an open-ended straight draw. Obviously, all these king x are a pair of kings. Our ace highs, yes, they're air like ace deuce, but at least we have an overcard to the king. We don't have many cards with two undercards to the 10, right? Everything has like reasonable equity here, and you can see why. Like when I go here, the equity out of position, we don't have that much red and orange here. Like 8-7 off, 8-6 off, 7-6 off. Like we have less misses than the big blind. When we look at the big blinds range here, there's a lot more offsuit junk here. There is every single suited junk here: 8-3, 7-3, all this stuff that we don't have down here. All this stuff is junk. Obviously, the deuces can be a pair, but they still don't have a lot of equity. Um, so the big blinds, like if you can think about it this way too, in position we have the big blind has 59% of hands. We have 53, so we have a slightly tighter range, but we also have, all the pocket pairs, all the king queens, king jacks, king ten suiteds, ace jack, ace queen, ace king. We have a lot more of the stronger hands in the range. Now, the big thing is why do we not get a bet big here? So I see some all of these answers that are like not wrong, but I don't think they're like the best here. And it mostly has to do with like the top pair. It's very easy for the big blind here to have a decent top pair. Like they can have king 10 off, they can have deuces, they can have king deuce off, they can have king deuce suited. Like in terms of the really strong hands, the only really strong hands they don't have are pocket kings and tens. But it doesn't really matter there because they make up such a small percentage of our range. So here it's really how many top pairs do we have that they don't have? So we have ace king and they don't. We have king queen. In this simulation, they do not have king queen suited, but they have a little bit of king queen off. Now, how many people do we think are just calling 100%, like 95% of the time? Three, like this has them three betting king queen off like 90% of the time. Um, I think a lot of people just call in the big blind with king queen off, um, king jack off, and like let's say they have king queen here because they have king jack at like almost full weight. The issue then is like the only hands that we really want to start betting really big with are like ace king and king queen. That's it. Kings doesn't make sense to bet big with much. Pocket tens doesn't really make much sense with because it doesn't need much protection and you block a lot of the calls. So we're really not winning the big game that much because the big blind can just have king queen and king jack here and you don't really want to be by betting bigger. What you're doing is they fold more and then you're narrowing their range to these stronger hands more often. Okay, so the only overpair we have that wants to bet big here is aces. So in terms of these bet big spots, a lot of the times it's going to be who has the overpair advantage and who has the strongest top pair, like kicker wise, advantage. It's not who has the sets in two pairs a lot because they just make up such a small percentage of your range. We're not really worried about that until later in the hand. On the flop, we're kind of worried about like how many top pairs can we press our small bet advantage, like air advantage here. And when we bet small here, okay, I don't know why my search thing is. So we're betting 30 to win 120, 30 to win 130 when we bluff here. The pot's 100. If we bet 30, we're risking 30 chips to win 130. So if it was 120, we'd expect to fold about 25% of the time. So we need to fold slightly less than that, like 23%. When we bet small here, they're folding almost 44% of the time. And the reason is because they have all this 9-8 off, 9-7 off, 9-6 off, 8-6, 7-6, 7-5, queen 5, queen 4, queen 3, jack 5, like all this air that's just auto folds, right? Like they're folding 45% of the time. We only need them to fold 23%, right? So therefore, we're just profitably bluffing with any two cards because they're folding too much. Does that make sense? So that was the first flop. Why we bet small. Let's look at 7-4 deuce, and we'll see if I have the very next flop. And this flop here, I said we were going to bet really big on 7-4 deuce. So I want to show this equity graph. Okay, this is really kind of a cool tool here to use in this equity graph. So in the equity graph here, you can see, so what this basically does is presents the how much equity each hand has and like the percentage of their range. So like our best hand here is at the 100%. So our best hand is like, are both like pocket deuces. Like we have slightly more, and then it goes down to like our worst hand is like 5-3 suited. Their worst hand is 7-3 suited, essentially. So at every point, you can see we have this nice little gap in our equities. This is what I was talking about with we're winning both the small game and the big game here. However, we're just betting small because there's not a lot of hands here. Like in terms of the big game, it starts to get a little bit narrower up here. We're going to start to polarize more on the turn. So here we're at 60, and I have 7-4 deuce, but this is two tone. So we're slightly different stack size here, and it's going to change a little bit because it's two tone. So 7-4 deuce. So what's the main difference here between 7-4 deuce and king jack in terms of the small game? The big blind has a lot of air here, but what happened to the buttons range here? The button has a lot of air too. We have too much now, like queen jack, king 10, queen 10, jack 10, ace 9, ace 10, king 8 suited, king deuce suited. All this, we have a lot of air now as well because we missed this flop because we raise with offsuit 8s and offsuit 9s and offsuit 10s and jacks. So we don't hit a pair very often on this board, right? The big blind doesn't hit a pair there very often either. Both players have a lot of air, right? It's not that hard on 7-4 deuce to realize that both players miss this flop a lot. But what's the difference here with the big game? The overpair advantage is what's going to drive the betting here. We have 8s, 9s, 10s, jacks, queens, kings, aces. We also are going to have ace 7, king 7. We have ace 7 off, king 7 off, ace 7 suited, king 7 suited. All these hands that the big blind does not have. So now we tie in the small we kind of tie. Maybe the button wins a little bit in the air game because but both players miss the flop a lot and both players have a lot of air. Okay. And the button wins the big game by a lot because all their overpairs, if we look here, the big blind doesn't have 8s, 9s, 10s, jacks, queens, kings, aces. They have ace 7 is basically their best hand. They don't have 7-4 off. They don't have 4 deuce off. They can have pocket 4s and pocket deuces and pocket 7s, sure. But so we win this big game with our overcards. So what's going to be our strategy on this board? I already told you we're going to bet very large. Are we going to bet a lot? Are we going to check a lot? Like, what's kind of our strategy here? So what should happen here is we're going to check, and we should bet very large, a lot, and never check. And this is the thing that people screw up is they don't realize that we just check a lot here. Why can't we bet 100% of the time here? Why do we check so much here on 7-4 deuce? We check a lot because we have too much air. So it has nothing to do with balance. It has nothing to do with any of that. It's because we have too much air to bet. If we just start betting betting 100% of the time small, what happens when we get check raised? We're just screwed because we have too much air in our range now. And so, let's look at what hands want to bet very large 100% of the time. There's a lot of mixing that goes on here, but let's focus on the hands that always bet. Notice we're checking about 50% of the time. Just ignore this small bet here. We just bet large. This is an over bet, by the way. We're betting 73 into 61. Okay, we're betting really big. 8s, 9s, 10s, jacks, queens, kings, aces, ace 7, king 7, queen 7 suited. Those are the hands that want to bet 100% of the time. 4s and deuces. Okay? It's that simple. Not that hard to find that range. Now, how do we balance that range out? Let's say, when we bet 73 and they call, what's the most common hand they're going to have? I hope it's not sets because it's not good for us if we're betting 1.25x pot with jacks and they call us and they have sets or two pairs. It's going to be a pair of 7s or a pair of 4s. Okay? They have nothing else to call with here. So they're going to have a 7 or a 4. So what hands are we bluffing with? Hands that have decent equity against a 7 or 4. 9-8, 10-8, 10-9. I'm just looking at the hands that bet the most. 5-3 suited. 9-8 suited, 10-8 suited, 10-9 suited, Jack 9 suited, Jack 8 suited, Jack 10 off, Queen 8 off, King 5 off. We're just betting our weakest overcard hands that have reasonable equity against a pair of 7s or a pair of 4s. Now on these offsuit ones, we prefer to have a spade, like Queen 10 with the Queen of Spades, Queen 9 with the Queen of Spades, Jack 8 with the Jack of Spades, 10-9 with the spade. Because when we bet and they call, what do you know? They have a pair of 7s, They have a pair of fours, or they sometimes have a pair of deuces. It's not that complicated. Or they're just going to fold 100% of the time. It's like they don't get to choose to not call with anything here because the flop didn't give them much. So we're betting really big on this board because both players lose the small game because they have so much air, and they get to bet really big because we have this big overpair advantage. Now, what do I see a lot of people do here? What's a lot of people's strategy on this board? 7-4 deuce. It's like bet 25%. But the problem with that is, let's say I'm in the big blind, I have a hand like 7-6. I don't really want to check raise you because I don't have eights, nines, tens, jacks, queens, kings, aces. I'm just opening myself for you to just kind of blast away with these overpairs and like blast away with 10-9 offsuit because yes, I can have 7-4 suited every once in a while or pocket fours every once in a while or pocket deuces, but really I just have a pair of sevens and you can really just put me in the cage. So I'm not going to really check raise much because I don't have the overpairs to protect myself. Yeah, like, if I bet small here, yeah, I can check raise a7, I can check raise king 7, you know, check raise pocket sevens or pocket fours, 7-4 or whatever, but like they raise like you're just we're not getting enough money into the pot by betting small with when we have pocket jacks. You guys, one of the biggest things is everyone's nuking money by not betting big in these spots with jacks. This is an overbet. You're betting 120% of the pot. Okay? If this was 100 big blinds, you probably bet like 200% of the pot here. You bet really, really big. The bigger the S stacked pot ratio almost here, the bigger you bet. Okay? So let's not spend as much time, but let's look at Jack 5-4. Jack 5-4 here, it's actually using a lot of small betting here. And I would have bet maybe a little bit more medium size here. But why are we betting small here and not betting really big? And there's two things going on here. Yeah, the straight and flush draws. So there's two things. One, it's jack high. So really, we only really have an advantage around ace jack and then aces, kings, and queens. Okay, so that's number one, is the big blind can have king jack, right? And you notice here the big blind can have ace jack. So we really don't want to start blasting away with king jack when the big blind can just have ace jack. So it's really just queens, kings, and aces are the only hands that really want to bet big here. So that's number one, the high card. That's why we bet larger on lower high card boards almost always. And we don't really bet large on ace high flops. Because the big blind has more coverage of top pair with decent kickers. It's the overpairs that are really allowing you to bet large because the big blind can't have them. The other thing is if we start betting really large on this board, the big blind just has so many combo draws. Like if we bet 100 here, we just really start to narrow the range to like 8-6 of spades or 7-6 or, all these like nut flush draws, king high flush draws. Like, let's say we have ace jack, okay? And we bet 100% of the pot and they call with queen 9 of spades. What have we accomplished there? So it's not that we incentivize the big blind to stay in the pot because we'd rather bet small. Ace jack just bets small here. It doesn't want to bet big. Why? The bigger we bet, the more they fold, and therefore the more we narrow their range to stronger hands. This board is connected and has a flush draw. So the bigger we bet, the more likely the opponent just has queen 9 of spades, king 3 of spades, queen 3 of spades, 7-6 of hearts, 6-3 suited. How is ace jack doing against those hands? Is it dominating them or is it flipping against them? It's flipping. So you don't get any value. So we need to bet small to allow wider hands to come in order to get value with ace jack. So one of the biggest mistakes I see with bet sizing, and I want you to pause this if you're watching the recording and re-listen to this like 3 times, because this might be probably the most important thing in this webinar. The more connected and flush draw the board. So if there's a flush draw on the board and it's connected, as in there's a lot of open-ended straight draws possible, you don't want to bet big because you're narrowing their range too much to combo draws and strong draws. That if you have even if you have kings here, you're just going to narrow the range to too many combo draws that are doing really well against your ace jack, king jack, pocket queens. Now, if I made this to like a four of hearts, different story because there's no flush draws now. Or if I made the four of spades the deuce of spades, different story because there's less straight draws now. So if you were here last week, it was the same mistake I made when I had queen nine of diamonds on versus the small blind, and I bet big on jack five four two diamonds, and I wasn't supposed to bet big because I just narrowed the small blind's range way too much to ace high and king high flush draws and open ended straight draws. So we can look here at 853 two tone. It's kind of different. It's not as so we have a lot of straight draws, a lot of a flush draw. But the issue is here was we have overpairs, right? So this has kind of got two things going on where it's a flush draw board. We're probably not gonna like. So you okay? Here we go. You see, there's kind of two strategies going on here now. On 853, when we added the flush draw here, we still want to bet big with these hands that need like pocket nines, pocket tens, jacks, queens. Like we need a lot of value and protection. However, there's a lot of hands we don't necessarily want to bet really big with, like 10-8, for example, or Jack 8. We want to bet smaller because we don't want to narrow their range too much to these combo draws. In general, when there's a flush draw on the board, it caps the size you want to bet. So, but again here, a lot of checking on this low card board. I want to change the situation completely though. Okay, and we're gonna go to my favorite flop. Here, we're gonna ace jack 10 rainbow. Okay. So I don't want to click it yet. So what this situation is: 40 big blinds effective. The cutoff raises, the button calls, and the flop comes ace jack 10 rainbow. And I want you guys to describe, using the terms the big game and the small game, what our strategy is going to be on the flop from the cutoff. I'll give you guys 1 minute, and I want you to think about this. Everyone needs to think about this. And yep, so cutoff raises. You can look up here if you need it. Cutoff versus button, 40 big blinds. So using the terms small game and big game, what is the cutoff strategy going to be? I'll give you guys a hint because I'm seeing some of the answers now. You need to think about both players' ranges here. So here's the cutoff range, okay? So ace jack 10, ace high hands obviously doing good. These king high hands are doing all right because they have a gut shot. These queen high hands are all right because they're doing a gut shot. Jack high hands have a pair, 10 high hands have a pair, and then we have all these small pairs and these suited connectors that are doing shit, right? So everything down here is kind of doing shit. Everything else is fine. Okay? Now let's go button versus raise from the cutoff. Well, cutoff has all the ace X. Cutoff has all the king X. They have, queen jack, queen 10. Note here, they don't have king 9. They don't have king 8. They don't have king 7. They don't have king 6. They have the same pairs and some of the suited connectors. The cutoff, the button wins the small game. Why does the button win the small game? The button calls 17.7% of hands. The button calls 17.7% of hands. The cutoff raises with 38% of hands. They have more king 8, they have more king deuce, more king 3, more queen 4, more jack 6 suited, 10-6 suited, 8-6 suited. Yes, ace 5 is doing slightly better on this board, but not really. Now, the small game, maybe it's a little bit more tied. You could argue that as well. But certainly, both players don't have much air. Who wins the big game? So we can look here at the ranges. I can show you. Here's the buttons range. And here's the cutoffs range. Who wins the big game? Cutoff wins the big game. How does the cutoff win the big game when... How does the cutoff win the big game when we can have king queen off, we can have aces, we can have jacks, we can have tens, we can have ace jack, we can have ace 10. We can have king queen. How does this range win the big game? Cutoff. The button doesn't have aces, doesn't have jacks very much, doesn't have tens very much, doesn't have king queen off always, doesn't have ace jack suited always, doesn't have ace queen, doesn't have ace king. So it doesn't. It's not about who has the nutted hands. It's about how often you have the nutted hands. So I'll tell you right now, the strategy for the cutoff is to check 100% of the time. There we go. Remember, 94% check. Whose range is wider? The cutoff's range is wider. So if we look here, both players can have king queen. However, if you look here, the cutoff has 413 combos of hands. The button has 191. So we have 413 by 191. Let's make it easier and just call it that the button's range is half as wide. So they're going to have ace jack twice as often. They're going to have king queen twice as often. They're going to have jack 10 twice as often. Now, sometimes they 3-bet preflop. And yes, they don't have aces, jacks, and tens. However, they have a straight here 6.4% of the time and two pair 19.4% of the time. 16% of the range is a straight or two pair. 16%. Let's add in top pair. Almost 35% of the range is top pair or better. And you've added in something here. You're out of the position, right? Look at what's different about this chart. Where is the out of position's advantages here? So before we saw the out of the pre-flop raiser was always ahead of the pre-flop caller. But where's the advantage on this chart for the green out of position player? So it's not equity realization. The out of position player just doesn't have any advantages at any part of the range because their range is wider and the button's calling range is so tight. Everyone is trained to c-bet because they play against the big blind. And you get to c-bet a lot against the big blind. Why? You get to c-bet a lot against the big blind because they have so much air in their range. When someone flats you that's not in one of the blinds, their range is going to be pretty tight. Okay? It's going to be tighter than your range. Therefore, you're probably going to lose the small game every time when you're flatted by a player that's not the button. Or, sorry, not the blinds. You're probably going to lose the small game. Okay? So, therefore, we just check because we don't have any advantages. You don't get a c-bet. It's not this, like, God-given right because you raise pre-flop that you just get to bet the flop. Like, sure, you can do it, but it's a pretty shit strategy because you're just betting into a range that's stronger than yours. So, what happens then? Oh, you check. And now the button bets. Small. Why do they not bet big? Well, because we can have king queen on the button as well. You know, we are in the cutoff. We can have king queen. We can have ace jack. So we mostly just bet small. Why? Because we win the small game here. We don't have any air. They have more of the king 8 off and stuff like that we can just attack. Ace 7 deuce. So what happens now? Ace 7 deuce. Same situation. See if I have ace 7 deuce. Good old classic. Two-tone. So what happens on this flop? Who wins the small game on ace 7 deuce? Cut off or the button? Here's the cutoff's range right here. Before I click it, you can see now, here's the cutoff's range. Ace 7 deuce. What's the small game here? Yeah, we lose the small game in the cutoff. Why? Because we have queen 9 off, jack 9 off, 10 9 off, jack 10 off, king 10 off. Look at all this big chunk of offsuit hands. It doesn't have anything to do with the aces. Okay? It has to do with this offsuit hands. Look at all our offsuit hands that completely whiff on ace 7 deuce. Okay? We have too much Broadway air. Who wins the big game on ace 7 deuce? Who wins the big game? Does the cutoff have more ace-x? So a lot of people just think that the cutoff has more aces. Do they? So let's look at it from two ways. One, yes, the cutoff can have ace 5, ace 6, ace 7, ace 8. However, the button's range is twice as tight. I don't know the correct way to say that, but I think you guys understand what I'm saying. It has half as many combos. I'll say that. That sounds more elegant. The button's range has half as many combos, so it doesn't matter that they don't have ace 7 offsuit in their range because they have ace jack twice as often as you do. So on ace 7 deuce, The cutoff's still going to check a lot, and if they do bet, they're only going to bet small. Okay? So they check 80% of the time. Why? Well, do you really want to go bet with ace queen? Because it's kind of hard to just start blasting ace x, because look at this hand in the cutoffs range, the buttons range. Ace queen off. Oh, ace jack off. They have all the strong aces other than ace king. Your only advantage on this flop, your only advantage in terms of like, is like ace king. It's your only like hand that you can have that the button can't have. Except look at this. This is the disadvantage. Look at how little offsuit air they have versus we have all the offsuit nines. I'm going to go back. You see, we have like king nine, like we have way more junk in our range. So we just check a lot. And we only bet small because the only hand that wants to bet big is ace king. We're not going to build the range about one hand. So we end up checking a lot. And now these overpairs, oh, they're kind of shit now. Let's change it to like a 9 high flop. Let's see what 9 high flops I have. So now we should get some big bets. So now you see, oh, here's bet 75. Why? Well, we have this advantage around 10s, jacks, queens, kings, and aces. Oh, and then what happened here on the 9x? Does the button have 9 high hands? King 9, queen 9, jack 9, 10 9? No. Do we? Yeah, these are pretty good hands now. With jack 9's a pretty strong hand now because we're not worried about pocket 10s, jacks, queens, kings, or aces. And we're only like, they can have ace 9. But so now all of these, like, and like a pair of sixes, like our suited sixes are doing better because we're only worried about a 9 and they don't have a 9 very often. We're not worried about overpairs. So now we got to start betting big again and betting more often because all these 9 high hands hit. Jack 10 has a lot more equity now because it has straight draws. Same with queen 10. What if I change this to 8 high board? 8 4 deuce rainbow. What happened now? We have a lot more air again, and we're probably betting really big when we bet. So now, again, here's an 8 high board. We check a lot because we have a lot of air with these 9 high hands and king jacks. We still have a lot of air. And we start overbetting. What hands do we overbet with? Our overpairs, an ace 8 and king 8. Because both players have a lot of air, and we win the big game with our overpairs. You want to bet pocket queens? Sure, go for it. Bet 125% of the pot. Just don't bet 25% of the pot here. You're not getting enough money into the pot with your advantages here. You're making a lot of money with jack 9 off here, betting 125% of the pot. Because what happens? You bet 125 and they call with a pair of 8s or pocket 7s, and then the turn's a jack. What are you going to do now? You just got to keep betting with your jack 9 for value because they don't have king jack, queen jack anymore because they folded those on the flop. Let's talk about the turn. So we're going back to, I'm sorry, I know we're jumping around. So we're going back to button versus big blind, 40 big blinds because this is the easiest way to explain this. Okay? So we're going to make this again ace 10 4 rainbow. Okay? Ace 10 4 rainbow. So we've already kind of explained, hopefully, what's our strategy here? We're going to bet everything, and we're going to bet small because we're attacking the... So we bet, two things happen here. We bet 100% of our range, right? And then the big blind calls. Okay? Something happened here. What happened once the big blind called? Big blind's range narrowed. What happened to the big blind's air? What happened to the big blind's air? It folded. It's gone. What happened to the big blind's best hands? Like ace 10, ace 4, pocket 4s. They're gone. They check raise the flop. So their best hands are gone. Their worst hands are gone. What is the big blind left with? The middle. Weaker pair of aces, weaker top pair, lots of 10x, lots of pair of 4s, lots of king, queen jack, queen jack. And then there's like the speculative hands like queen 9 suited, jack 9 suited, jack 8 suited, queen 8 suited, king 8 suited, like these backdoor king high flush draws. And then some of these wheel straight draws. Okay? What happens to our range? What happened to our air? We still have our air. What happened to our strong hands? We have all the strong hands as well. We bet everything. We can have the strong hands and we can have the shit hands. So when they bet, the button bets, Big blind calls, and I'm going to put up a complete brick. The 8 of hearts. Okay? The big blind's going to check. We already know that. What is going to be the most common sizing for the button once the big blind checks here? Is it going to be, and I'll tell you the options here, it's 30%, 65%, 100%, or 150%. And the pot is 160, and we're playing about 588 behind. Okay. So who wins the small game now? Most people seem to get that the button does not want to bet small. Who wins the small game? The big blind wins the small blind. The big blind wins the small blind because they don't have any air. Their worst hands are like king queen, queen jack, king jack, king 8 suited, queen 9 suited. Our worst hands are like what can we have here? Queen deuce, jack 3. We have a lot of shit. 10-4 is a good hand. 9-5. We have a lot of trash here. Deuces. Okay? So, I can tell you here, the most common bet size is probably going to be like 160, and it's probably going to be the only size it's chosen. Why? Because 240 is too big, because we're under a 4-to-1 SPR. So 4-to-1 would be 640, and we have 160 left. If it was 640, we'd bet 100% of the pot, which would be 160. They call, the pot would be 480, and we'd have 480 left. That'd be completely geometric. So I'm guessing here, it's probably just going to be 160. You can see that is the most common sizing here. Okay. Now, we check a lot. Now we're checking half our range. Why? Well, because we don't want to bet a pair of tens. Because they have a pair of tens. The only tens we're betting are 10-8, 10-4, pocket tens. Ignore this like queen 10 off, like betting half. I don't know why the hell we're doing that, because king 10's not betting and jack 10's not betting. So just ignore stuff like this when you're looking at a solver, because none of us know. Like, I could look into it and figure it out, but not going to. So this is where you start to see more polarization, because we lose the small game. We lose the small game and we win the big game. What's the big game here? Ace king, ace queen, ace jack, ace 10, ace 9, ace 8. Now you can see here, ace deuce, ace 3, ace 4, ace 5, ace 6 sometimes bet. But the reason they don't want to bet, and the reason ace 7 and ace 9 always bet, let's focus on ace 9, is because they don't have a hand better than ace 9. They check raise ace jack on the flop, and then ace 8's 2 pair. So we bet like ace 9 or better. Yeah, the big game hand class here is like top pair kicker, good kicker. Yeah. We bet like ace 9 or better. Here's 10-8, here's pocket 8s, here's pocket 4s. And then we bet bluffs. What bluffs are we betting? Like, we bet some really trashy, like king deuce, queen deuce. This is a whole nother lecture. Why do we bet queen 3 more than we bet king jack? Most people bluff with king jack here. This is like always the case. You want to bluff queen 3. It's a little bit to do with blockers, but not exactly. The short answer is king jack can still beat all their queen jacks and queen 9 suiteds. Queen 3 does not beat those hands. King jack also dominates queen jack. Queen 3 can get them to fold out all their gut shots. So what happens here is we bet, oh, what do you know? They start folding a pair of 10s. They call with a pair of aces. They fold all this other stuff. So now like they're left with like some pair of 10s, a lot of pair of aces. You call. Let's say the river's a deuce. We check. There's going to be no small betting. It's only going to be big. And we just beat the hand. We bet the hands that beat the middle parts of their range, that have enough equity. And like we bet the big game. We win the big game. As a general rule, the caller of the previous street normally wins the small game. The better normally wins the big game. Why? Because the better has to bet bluffs, and they bet good hands too. The caller tends to fold their bad hands and raise their good hands. So this is really important. This small game, big game is really important on turns and rivers. Okay. What happens now? Let's say we bet, like what happens a lot here. We bet 30, they call, 8 of hearts comes, check, check. Deuce of clubs. So when check check now on the turn, who wins the small game? The big blind does. The big blind still wins the small game because the button can still have whatever random trash they bet on the flop. What happened in the big game though? The big game now, the big blind caught up. Let's make this like three of hearts. The big blind wins kind of both games now. They win the small game for sure, but they also win the big game because now they have like ace seven more than the button does. They have 10-8 more. They have ace eight more. They have ace three more. Like, because the button doesn't have as many big hands because they checked back. So the value of a 10 went way up because the big blind, the button didn't bet, so they're less likely to have an ace. So now you get into some river, block betting games because they don't have much air. So you see here, they're betting a lot. Um, all right, I know this was like bet sizing is a topic that you can't really, you really can't cover it in 1 hour. And we didn't really get to specific hand examples. I was just kind of using specific flops that I knew the bet sizings would be the way they are that I think people misplay. In terms of this whole big game, small game type of mindset and with betting, this is helpful. Did you guys like this? All right. I'm glad you guys enjoyed. Thank you very much. Awesome. Thanks, guys.